The corridors of Galactic Union Academy buzzed with excitement and fear. Word had spread faster than a quantum transmission. A human was joining their class. Not just any human, but one from Earth, a planet so dangerous it was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. The Academy's halls were designed to accommodate students of all shapes and sizes. Floating plasma orbs provided soft light that wouldn't hurt sensitive eyes, and the air was a careful mix of gases suitable for most breathing types. Today, these halls felt different. Even the bravest students hugged the walls as they heard heavy footsteps approaching. Mike walked through the main entrance, his movements careful and measured. He looked mostly normal, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. But something about him made other students nervous. Maybe it was the way he moved, like a predator trying very hard not to look like one. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that his bones were dense enough to survive falls that would shatter most species, and his muscles were strong enough to bend metal. The principal's assistant, a floating gas cloud named Puff, led Mike to the gymnasium. "Remember," Puff whispered in a voice like wind through trees, "our gravity is set to standard galactic normal. Would you like it adjusted?" "No, thank you," Mike replied softly, trying to sound friendly. "I should get used to it. It's like walking in a pool back home, but I can manage." The gym doors slid open with a gentle hiss. Inside, 20 students of various species turned to stare. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few were geometric shapes that seemed to ignore physics. At the front stood Mr. Blue, the gym teacher, his 4 arms crossed in different patterns as he checked his teaching tablet. "Ah, our new student." Mr. Blue's voice boomed cheerfully. His skin shifted through shades of blue as he spoke, a sign of positive emotion for his species. "Class, please welcome Mike from Earth." Yes, Earth is a death world, but in this academy, we judge individuals, not their planets of origin. A crystalline student in the back made a sound like tinkling bells, their version of a scared laugh. Another student, something like a 6-legged cat with scales, whispered to its neighbor, "I heard they drink hydrogen hydroxide to survive." "Actually drink it." Mike pretended not to hear. He'd been briefed about this. Most species saw water as a dangerous industrial solvent, just like they saw Earth's gravity, atmospheric pressure, temperature ranges, and basically everything else as lethal. He took his place in the line of students, trying to make himself look smaller. Today, Mr. Blue continued, his skin now a calm azure. "We'll start with simple stretching exercises. Each species has its own routine loaded into your personal guidance holos. Mike, I've studied Earth physiology. Your routine is preloaded." A holographic instructor appeared in front of each student. Mike's looked human and demonstrated basic stretches. Around him, other students followed their own guides, some melting into puddles, others expanding like balloons, and a few splitting into smaller versions of themselves. As Mike went through his routine, he noticed the other students watching him. Every time he bent or stretched, they flinched slightly. It wasn't their fault, he reminded himself. To them, his movements looked like they should be breaking bones. The casual way he could touch his toes seemed impossible in their eyes, given how solid his skeleton was. One student, Rex, a being made of shifting crystal formations, was particularly interested. His crystalline eyes narrowed every time Mike moved. There was something in that gaze that went beyond curiosity or fear. It looked like challenge. Mike finished his stretches and waited for further instructions. He'd been warned that physical education would be the hardest class to fit in. How do you participate in sports when your classmates could be shattered by a pat on the back? How do you join team activities when everyone thinks you're built like a tank? As Mr. Blue prepared to announce the next activity, Mike took a deep breath. He reminded himself of what his mother had said. Just because you're stronger doesn't make you scary. It's your actions that define you, not your muscles. He hoped his classmates would learn this too, eventually. "Time for baseline assessments," Mr. Blue announced, his skin rippling with excited patterns of turquoise and navy. Each student will demonstrate their physical capabilities so we can design appropriate exercise programs. The gym's environmental controls hummed as they adjusted for each student. The first to step forward was a gaseous being named Wisp, who demonstrated excellent spatial awareness by forming complex shapes in 3 dimensions. The class applauded politely as Wisp turned into a perfect dodecahedron. Next came Pod, a plant-based student who could stretch their vine-like limbs to remarkable lengths. They easily reached the gym's ceiling, 20 meters up, and grabbed a hanging ring with their leaves. More applause followed, though some students were clearly waiting for the main event, the humans assessment. Mike watched carefully as each classmate showcased their abilities. Some could change colors, others could split into multiple smaller versions of themselves, and one could even temporarily phase through solid objects. Each demonstration happened under carefully controlled conditions, with gravity and atmosphere adjusted to their home world specifications. Finally, it was Mike's turn. "Now," Mr. Blue said, his color shifting to a cautious periwinkle, "Mike has requested Earth standard conditions for his assessment. This means we'll be increasing gravity to 3 times our normal setting and adjusting atmospheric pressure accordingly. Viewing shields will activate for your safety." Shimming energy barriers rose around the assessment area. Mike heard nervous whispers as the gravity controls engage. The other students watched through the barriers, their various sensory organs fixed on him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The change was immediate. Where the previous light gravity had made Mike feel like he was walking in water, now things felt almost normal. He rolled his shoulders, enjoying the familiar weight of his own body. "Begin with a standard mobility assessment," Mr. Blue instructed, hovering safely behind the barrier. His 4 arms held different monitoring devices. Mike started with basic movements: walking, running, jumping. To him, these were nothing special, but the class watched in horror as he moved effortlessly in what they considered crushing gravity. When he did a simple jumping jack, several crystalline students vibrated in distress. "Impossible," Rex chimed, his crystal body gleaming with disbelief. The gravity should be pulverizing his bones. "Now for strength assessment," Mr. Blue announced. "Please lift the adaptive weight unit." A metallic cube sat in the center of the testing area. It could adjust its mass using artificial gravity fields. Mike approached it casually, aware of the dead silence in the gym. He gripped the handles on its sides and lifted. The cube adjusted automatically, getting heavier until it found his comfortable lifting threshold. The monitoring system beeped rapidly. Mr. Blue's skin turned almost white, a sign of shock in his species. That's 10 times the academy average," he stammered. Mike carefully set the cube down, trying not to show how much he'd been holding back. On Earth, he could lift more, but he didn't want to frighten his classmates any further. The final test was endurance. As Mike began a simple running exercise, the other students watched in growing amazement. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. He wasn't even breathing hard. "How is he not tired?" Pod whispered, their leaves quivering. "In that gravity." "Enough," Mr. Blue finally said, his color returning to normal. "I think we have sufficient data." As the environmental controls reset to standard settings, Mike could feel the atmosphere in the room had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else: respect, and perhaps a hint of challenge from certain students. Rex particularly seemed to be calculating something as his crystalline form shifted thoughtfully. The way he watched Mike suggested that the assessment had only been the beginning of something much more interesting. The next day, the gym buzzed with excitement. Word of Mike's performance had spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. As students filed in, Rex positioned himself directly in Mike's path, his crystalline body glowing with a fierce inner light. "Deathworlder," Rex's voice chimed like breaking glass. "Let's see how well you do in actual competition. Unless you're afraid of breaking me." His crystal fragments shifted in what passed for a smirk among his species. Mike felt every eye in the gym turn toward them. He'd been warned about this. Sooner or later, Someone would want to prove themselves against the human. "I don't want any trouble," he said quietly, trying to step around Rex. "No trouble," Rex chimed, his crystal body sparkling with challenge. "Just friendly competition. Mr. Blue is setting up the obstacle course today. Partner with me." Before Mike could respond, Mr. Blue's voice boomed across the gym, his skin showing swirls of excited orange. "Today's activity is the Multi-Environment Obstacle Challenge. Partners will compete in pairs, with each obstacle adjusted to the competitor's home gravity and atmosphere." The course looked like something out of a dream. It had sections that were liquid, gaseous, and solid. Some parts glowed with strange energies, while others seemed to bend space itself. Environmental barriers separated each section, allowing different gravity and atmospheric settings. "First pair, Rex and Mike," Mr. Blue announced, his forearms working quickly to adjust the safety controls. "Remember, this is about completing the course, not just raw speed." Other students gathered around the course edges, their bodies humming, glowing, or vibrating with excitement. Some were placing bets using credit chips, though they tried to hide this from Mr. Blue. The starting signal pulsed. Rex moved first, his crystalline form flowing smoothly through the low-gravity section designed for his species. He moved like liquid glass, beautiful and dangerous. The watching students chimed in appreciation. Mike started more slowly, his section set to Earth gravity. The first obstacle was a climbing wall. While Rex glided up his section like floating crystal, Mike had to actually climb. But years of Earth sports had made him strong and quick. He kept pace. The next section involved crossing a pool of high-density liquid. Rex skated across his portion, crystal facets gleaming. Mike surprised everyone by diving in and swinging powerfully through his section. Several gaseous students expanded in shock. The idea of voluntarily submersing oneself in liquid was alien to them. "Look at his muscle control," Pod whispered to Wisp, "even in that gravity." The final obstacle was an agility test. Rex moved like dancing light through his maze of barriers. Mike's section required him to jump, roll, and sprint. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so solid and heavy. They reached the finish line at almost the same moment. Rex's crystal body pulsed with bright colors. He was breathing hard, or whatever his species did instead of breathing. Mike had barely broken a sweat. "Impressive," Rex chimed, his tone mixing surprise with lingering challenge. "But you were holding back. I saw it on the agility section." Mike shrugged, trying to look casual. "Maybe a little. I didn't want to risk breaking anything." Next time, Rex's crystal structure shifted into what might have been a grin. "Don't hold back. I'm tougher than I look." The other students were chattering excitedly now, their earlier fear giving way to fascination. A few even drifted closer to Mike, asking questions about Earth sports and training. Mr. Blue watched all this with his skin showing pleased patterns of blue and gold. "Well done, both of you," he said. "Perhaps next time we'll try team competitions." Mike nodded, feeling more hopeful than he had since arriving. Maybe, just maybe, being a Deathworlder wouldn't define his entire academy experience. As Rex moved away, his crystal form still gleaming with competitive spirit, Mike realized he might have just made his first friend here, even if it had started as a challenge. A week had passed since the obstacle course challenge, and the gym class had settled into an uneasy routine. Today was Team Sports Day, and Mr. Blue had divided the class into mixed species groups for a game he called Universal Spheroid Pass, a sport designed to work with everyone's different abilities. "Remember," Mr. Blue's skin flickered with cautionary purple, "the gravity zones are clearly marked. Stay in your designated areas, and be mindful of the safety barriers." Mike stood in his Earth gravity zone, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. His teammates included Pod, whose stretchy vines made them excellent at catching, and Wisp, who could spread out to block large areas. Even Rex was on their team, his crystalline form glittering under the gym's lights. The game started smoothly. The ball, A soft, glowing sphere that could adjust its density bounced between gravity zones as students passed it around. Mike was careful to only tap the ball gently, aware that his full strength could send it flying through the safety barriers. Everything changed when Tiny Dot, a spherical student from a low-gravity world, drifted too close to a gravity barrier while reaching for the ball. The barrier flickered, a malfunction in the safety systems. Mike saw it happen as if in slow motion. Dot was about to drift into the Earth gravity zone. At their size and density, the sudden gravity increase would be like hitting concrete at high speed. Without thinking, Mike moved. The class watched in horror as he crossed the gravity barrier, his muscles straining against 3 times the force they'd been under. He reached Dot in 2 massive strides, cupped his hands around the tiny student, and twisted his body to absorb the gravity shock. "Impossible," someone shouted. "No one can move that fast and crush gravity." But Mike wasn't done. He could hear the gravity system's control unit crackling. More barriers were starting to fail. Pod section was about to collapse, which would send the plant-based student crashing to the floor. "Everyone to the low-gravity zone," Mike shouted, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that humans used in emergencies. He gently passed Dot to Rex, then sprinted through the crushing gravity to reach Pod. The class watched in stunned silence as Mike moved with full power for the first time. His legs pumped like pistons, muscles working at levels that would shatter most beings' bones. He scooped up Pod just as their gravity zone failed, then launched himself toward the safe zone with a jump that carried them both 5 meters through the air. They landed safely in the low-gravity area, just as Mr. Blue managed to shut down the malfunctioning system. The gym fell silent except for the hum of the remaining safety barriers. By the galactic core, Mr. Blue's skin had turned pure white with shock. "I've never, in 30 cycles of teaching." Mike stood quietly, aware that he'd just shattered any pretense of being normal by their standards. He'd moved faster, jumped higher, and shown strength far beyond what he'd displayed in his initial assessment. The other students stared at him with new eyes, not just with fear, but with something like awe. "You saved me." Dot's tiny voice broke the silence. "Even though everyone says humans are dangerous, being strong doesn't mean being dangerous," Mike replied softly. "On Earth, we learn to be careful with our strength, to protect, not harm." Rex's crystalline form shimmered thoughtfully. "You've been holding back much more than we realized, haven't you? Even during our challenge." Mike nodded. "I didn't want to scare anyone, but I couldn't hold back when someone might get hurt." The school's emergency response team arrived, their sensors sweeping the gym for residual damage. As they worked, Mike noticed the other students' attitudes shifting. They no longer hugged the walls when he passed. Instead, they looked at him with curious respect. "Well," Mr. Blue said, his color returning to normal, "I believe this calls for a discussion about safety protocols, and perhaps a revaluation of what we think we know about Deathworlders." The day after the gravity system malfunction, Mr. Blue announced a special project. "Today, we're going to learn about each other's worlds," he said, his skin showing educational patterns of green and blue. "Since yesterday's events showed us how different our physical abilities are, let's understand why." The class sat in a circle on the gym floor, with special cushions adjusted for each species' needs. Mike sat cross-legged on his reinforced Earth gravity pad, noticing how the others no longer kept extra space between themselves and him. "Mike," Mr. Blue gestured with 2 of his arms, "would you tell us about Earth? Not the official data, but what it's really like to live there." Mike took a deep breath. "Well, imagine a world where water falls from the sky regularly. We call it rain. Most of you know water as a dangerous industrial solvent, but on Earth, all life depends on it." "You mean you evolved in constant acid rain?" Pod's leaves trembled with horror. "It's not acid to us," Mike explained. "Our cells need it, just like we need the heavy gravity. Without it, our bones would get weak. Even the air we breathe would be poisonous to many of you. It's full of reactive oxygen." Rex's crystal structure sparkled with interest. Is that why you're built like a living tank? Your world tries to kill you constantly. Mike nodded. Everything on Earth had to become tough to survive. Our plants fight for sunlight and grow through solid rock. Our oceans have pressures that would crush most spaceships. Even our smallest animals are incredibly hardy. He pulled out his tablet and showed them pictures of Earth. The class gasped at images of waves taller than buildings, mountains that scraped the clouds, and storms that could level cities. But how do you survive? Wisp swirled with confusion. Those conditions are extreme even by Deathworld standards. We adapt, Mike said. Humans can live in frozen wastelands and burning deserts. We learn to swim in those dangerous oceans and climb those killer mountains. But more importantly, we learn to help each other survive. The class was silent for a moment, processing this. Then Dot spoke up, their tiny spherical form pulsing with curiosity. Is that why you didn't hesitate to save me? Because on Earth, you have to help each other. Exactly, Mike smiled. On Earth, being strong means nothing if you don't use that strength to protect others. It's part of our culture, our history. Every human child learns this. Mr. Blue's skin showed approving patterns. Perhaps this explains yesterday's events better than any technical data could. Mike's capabilities aren't just about physical strength. They're about using that strength responsibly. Rex chimed thoughtfully. On my world, we grow our crystal forms to be beautiful, not strong. We never imagined beauty and strength could exist together until we saw how Mike moved yesterday. That's what makes the galaxy amazing, Mike said. We're all different, but we can learn from each other. Yes, I'm stronger in Earth gravity, but Pod can photosynthesize energy from starlight. Wisp can change shape at will, and Rex can refract energy through his body like living crystal. The conversation continued, with each student sharing stories about their homeworld. They learned that Wisp's gaseous form evolved to survive solar storms, and Pod species could regrow from a single leaf. Even Rex admitted that his crystalline people developed their forms to withstand the intense pressure waves of their world's constant seismic activity. As the class ended, something had changed. The fear of the Deathworlder was replaced by fascination and respect. Mike was no longer just the dangerous human. He was a classmate who had shown them that great power could exist alongside great responsibility. Next week, Mr. Blue announced, his skin showing excitement, we'll learn some modified Earth sports. Who's interested in something called volleyball, with safety barriers, of course. Every hand, tentacle, and appendage in the class went up. The Academy's annual science fair was approaching, and the gym class had been converted into an exhibition space. Students from all grades displayed their projects, many involving dangerous chemical reactions or unstable energy fields. Special containment barriers separated each display, their soft blue glow providing a false sense of security. Mike stood near his class's sports science project, a demonstration of how different gravitational forces affected various species' movement patterns. Rex had helped design the gravity modulators, while Pod provided biological data from their extensive research. The containment field is fluctuating. Rex chimed suddenly, his crystalline body vibrating with concern. He pointed toward a project 3 stations down, where a junior student was attempting to demonstrate artificial star formation in miniature. Mike's Earth-trained senses picked up the warning signs immediately. The containment field was failing, and the artificial star was becoming unstable. Its core glowed with increasing intensity, sending out waves of heat that made the air shimmer. Everyone out. Mike shouted, but it was too late. The containment field collapsed with a thunderous crack. A wave of plasma erupted from the failing experiment, heading straight for a group of younger students. Without hesitation, Mike sprinted forward. His classmates watched in amazement as he moved through the now-crushing gravity. The artificial star's mass was affecting local gravitational fields. He reached the group of students just as the plasma wave hit. "Get behind me," he commanded, positioning himself between the deadly energy and the others. His Deathworlder physiology, evolved to withstand Earth's harshest conditions, was their only hope. The plasma washed over him like liquid fire. Any other species would have been incinerated instantly, but human skin had evolved to handle extreme temperatures. Mike gritted his teeth against the pain, using his body as a shield while Rex worked frantically to restore the containment field. The emergency shutdown isn't responding. Pod's vines stretched toward the control panel, trying to reach the manual override. But the heat was too intense. Their plant-based form couldn't get close enough. Mike, still holding his position against the plasma storm, called out, "Wisp, use your gaseous form to slip through the ventilation system. You can reach the main power core." Wisp understood immediately, their cloudy form dispersing into a fine mist that disappeared into the air vents. Seconds later, the power to the entire section cut out. The artificial star began to collapse, its energy dissipating harmlessly into the specially designed emergency absorption panels. As the crisis ended, Mike finally allowed himself to slump to the ground. His shirt had been burned away, revealing skin reddened but incredibly still intact. The younger students he protected stared at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "That was amazing." One of them squeaked. "You didn't even hesitate." Mr. Blue arrived with the emergency response team, his skin showing patterns of concern and relief. A human's ability to withstand extreme conditions just saved many lives, he announced to the gathered crowd. "This is why we celebrate diversity in our academy. Every species has its strengths, and today we witnessed one of humanity's finest traits, their capacity to endure what others cannot." Rex moved closer to Mike, his crystal form reflecting the emergency lights. "You know," he chimed softly, "when you first arrived, we thought having a Deathworlder in class was a disaster waiting to happen. We were right about the disaster part. We just didn't realize you'd be the solution, not the problem." Mike managed a tired smile. "On Earth, we have a saying, the true measure of strength lies not in how much you can destroy, but in how much you can protect." As the medical team checked him over, Mike could hear his classmates already spreading the story through their communication devices. The tale of the human who used his Deathworld adaptations to save others would be told throughout the academy for years to come. "Next time," Mr. Blue said, his skin showing proud swirls of blue and gold, "perhaps we should let Mike help design the safety protocols. After all, who better to plan for disasters than someone evolved to survive them?" 1 month after the science fair incident, the gym class looked very different from its first day. The usual safety barriers were still in place, but now they were decorated with Earth sports posters and information about different species' physical capabilities. Today was special. It was the first ever Mixed Adaptation Sports Festival. "Welcome, everyone." Mr. Blue's skin displayed festive patterns of rainbow colors. "Today we celebrate what we've learned about working together despite our differences, or perhaps because of them." Mike stood in the center of the gym, wearing his Earth gravity training suit. Around him, his classmates were setting up various sports stations, each designed to showcase different species' natural abilities. Rex had created a crystal climbing wall that refracted light in beautiful patterns. Pod had grown a living obstacle course from their own plant matter. Even Wisp had designed an aerial challenge course for gaseous beings. "First up," announced Mr. Blue, Earth volleyball, modified for multi-species play. The game they played barely resembled traditional volleyball, but it was arguably more exciting. Pod used their vines as natural nets, Wisp formed themselves into a living fog to make shots more challenging, and Rex's crystal form created dazzling light shows whenever he moved. Mike played with carefully controlled strength, setting up shots for his teammates rather than dominating the game. "Remember when we thought he'd break everything he touched?" Pod commented to Dot between sets. "Now he's teaching us how to safely enjoy Deathworld sports." The festival continued with more activities. Mike demonstrated Earth martial arts, showing how humans had developed fighting styles that used an opponent's strength against them. Several students were fascinated by the concept of gentle power. It's like you've been trying to tell us all along, Rex chimed thoughtfully during a break. Being strong doesn't mean you have to be dangerous. It's all about control and understanding. During lunch break, the class gathered around Mike as he shared some Earth snacks, specially prepared to be safe for different biologies. He explained how humans had learned to cook food to make it safer and more digestible, another adaptation from their harsh world. The Academy Board has made a decision, Mr. Blue announced near the end of the day, his skin showing official patterns of blue and silver. Based on the success of our class, they're updating the curriculum to include more Deathworld integration programs. Mike, would you be willing to help design some of the safety protocols? Mike smiled, remembering how nervous he'd been on his first day. I'd be honored. And maybe we could invite more Deathworld species to enroll. There's a lot we could learn from each other. Already done. Mr. Blue's skin flickered with excitement. We have 3 new students joining next semester, one from a high-gravity world, one from an acid planet, and another human. The class erupted in cheers. Rex's crystal form sparkled with enthusiasm as he suggested, we should start an interspecies sports club. Show everyone how different abilities can work together. Speaking of working together, Pod added, their leaves rustling with anticipation. We've been talking. How would you feel about us visiting Earth? With proper safety equipment, of course. Mike looked around at his classmates. At Rex's shimmering crystal form, Pod's gently waving vines, Wisps swirling clouds, and Dot's tiny but brave sphere. They were no longer afraid of him. Instead, they were curious, excited, and eager to learn more about his world. You know what? He said, I think that's a great idea. Earth may be a death world to you, but with the right preparation and understanding, it can also be a place of wonder. Just like how this gym class turned out to be so much more than any of us expected. Mr. Blue's skin showed the deepest, most satisfied blue they'd ever seen. And that, students, is the greatest lesson of all. In the vast galaxy we share, it's not our differences that define us, but how we learn to embrace them.